Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Classical Antiquity Sidequest, a podcast covering topics from classical antiquity. The period of time is known for, as Edgar Allan Poe put it, the glory that was Greece, the grandeur that was Rome. Our next side quest will take us into our second movie review, and today we'll be reviewing the 2011 film The Eagle, which stars Channing Tatum, guest stars Donald Sutherland, and basically involves a Roman legionnaire in Britain trying to restore his family's lost honor. I don't know how much more there is to it than that, but that's enough to get you started if you haven't seen the movie already. And our guide for this side quest is none other than Victor Lamas, who was present for the first episode about Alexander the Great and also the first movie review in which we reviewed 300. He is back today to talk about The Eagle. Victor Lamas, how are you, sir?
Good to see you again, Ben. I'm excited to talk about this movie. This is one of the rare, how do I say, finding good stuff, good cinematic depictions of the Roman history era is like I don't know, panning, for gold, right? And you sift a lot of dirt to find some nuggets occasionally. Sometimes they're just moments. Sometimes they're brief little things. There are some films that are just outright frustrating to sit through, and sometimes that makes me a person who you don't want to be in the movie theater next to. And so The Eagle was one of those. While not perfect, The Eagle is one of those that I found very enjoyable, and from my interest in Roman history, ancient history, I found one that that was pretty good. That didn't pluck my history offended strings.
Right,
Uh,
and I didn't know about this movie till you mentioned it on our last episode, and I watched it and enjoyed it quite a bit. It does have, I think you could say it's loosely based on historical events. Namely, there was a Roman Empire, there were some walls, there was Scotland, and there was a legion that I didn't know this until I started reading up on it to get ready for this. But the Ninth Legion did disappear in Britain, and no one's really sure what happened to it. So the novel that this movie is based on posits that it was lost in a battle that I guess is inspired by the Teutoburg Forest sort of disaster, in
right.
which the standard, the eagle, is lost, hence the title of the movie, and Channing Tatum is trying to get it back.
Yes, that is correct. The movie is based off this British or English lady, Rosemary Sutcliffe, who wrote young adult novels in the 50s and 60s. There were four based on a Roman era Britain, and then others about the Saxons and things like that. And this is the most famous one. It was called The Eagle of the Ninth, and it's referring to the standard. And again, she was not actually an expert in Roman history, so she gets some things incorrect in her novel. And yes, it is loosely based on this legend about this legion that was stationed in the north of England, the Ninth Hispana, which is the Spanish Legion, which was either it was comprised and originated in Spain, although it had a long history centuries earlier. I mean, it fought, and it was like 100-year-old legion at this point, at least in terms of its title, or maybe it was constituted because it won some victories in Spain. But that was its name, and then we don't have any record of it. There's some thought that it was, yes, ambushed and lost up north. Uh, Historians kind of debate because it does maybe reappear later somewhere else in the eastern part of the Roman Empire, at least the name does. But it does of course the Eagle standard, right? Anytime a standard was lost, that was a very big deal for the Romans. Um, the Romans were taught to venerate these silver eagles, these legionary standards, and so to lose them was a great disgrace. Augustus famously considered one of his greatest coups, I guess, was to regain the standards that were lost to the Parthians by Crassus, right? In the famous Roman defeated Carrhae, right? And so to regain those eagles had always been a big goal of the Romans ever since that defeat. So again, to lose an eagle was considered a great disgrace.
And he portrayed that, Augustus portrayed that as a military victory. To get those back was very important. And one thing that I thought was interesting was the director, for example. I think a lot of people probably have seen movies by him, but may not be aware of it. The director is Kevin MacDonald.
Mhm.
He is Scottish. He was concerned, as I was reading about this, about trying to get it as accurate as possible, but you run into problems. I read an interview. I'll try to remember to link to it in the post that I do about this episode. The historical consultant for the film was saying, look, we one of the big problems we had were we had to use togas, and the Romans
Right.
didn't really wear togas day-to-day basis, but audiences had no clue who was who unless they wore togas. So there were things like that that you had to tweak, um, and you kind of compress some of the historical events. We can talk about the Picts who were in it, the
Right.
Seal people. It's a little bit, the time period's a little off, although there is a lot about back then that we don't know, at least from the Scottish and the quote barbarian end quote side of things, because of the lack of
Yeah.
their historical records beyond archaeology. But there was an attempt to try to portray some things as accurately as possible. This wasn't necessarily like the documentaries that Kevin MacDonald has done, but I thought he did a good job in this of at least giving you a flavor of what Roman Britain and some aspects of it were like.
I agree with that. Right. Obviously, they had to compress. Most people don't know. They know about Hadrian's Wall, right? Most famously copied by, Game of Thrones, The Wall, right? Which is sort of a mix of the Great Wall of China, although it's more like Hadrian's Wall since, Game of Thrones is basically just England. Um, and they don't know about the Antonine Wall that was built, about 100 miles more north, 20 years later, but then abandoned. And yeah, the Picts are out of, I guess they're slightly anachronistic. These folks were called the Caledonians, but um, most people in that sense they know about Picts. I mean, essentially this movie is it's a very elemental, basic movie. Rome is civilization, right? You just in the sense of the Roman fort and then the villas of these folks. It's all just there. It's the sense of civilization, of order, of cleanliness, of technological, advancement. We are the Romans in this case as the viewer. And then the further north you get, in some ways, this movie, my gosh, this movie reminded me a lot as I was watching it. It could have been Last of the Mohicans. Uh, the Picts are depicted as this culture that, again, in some ways could have. I mean, the battle scene at the end, it could have been, like that last scene in the Daniel Day-Lewis movie, that sort of thing. So I like the fact that the movie, it does simplify things, right? Audiences expect togas on Romans, so you got to give them togas. They expect, uh, what I did like that they tried to, for the most part though, they got the armor and those tactics, kind of
The
right. They tried to bring those basic things right, that the Celts were still using chariots at this time as war vehicles. Um, at least that's what I mean, I think that in reality, that was probably brought from what we know of Julius Caesar, right? His first landing in England that he faced off against war chariots. Um, but it was, I mean, this movie, uh, in terms of, say, if we're going to use Gladiator 2 as just throwing everything over a 5 year period into a stew, right? This movie's far better. And it doesn't try to tell the whole story of the Roman Empire. It's a very simple movie. It's sort of a revenge movie. It's a chase movie. It's not too complex, which is perfectly fine for a movie.
And one thing that I thought was interesting was obviously there's a battle scene at the beginning where Channing Tatum, or near the beginning, where he gets hurt. And as I was rewatching it and had it on in the background, I remember him praying beforehand.
Right.
But you pointed out he was praying to Mithras, which would have been, as we all know from uh, hopefully this podcast, if not elsewhere. That was a very popular religious. I don't want to say boys' club, but it was very popular in places along the frontier, and so it would make sense, of course, for him to be initiated into that cult and to be observant of those rites, and also one thing that I thought though was very good about that was the Roman precision in battle when they're being attacked and then when they're going to rescue soldiers from a scouting party who had been captured and were going to be executed. They followed commands, they were disciplined, they didn't panic, they didn't get overwhelmed. I thought that and there wasn't, you and I have talked about this off record, offline before, but uh, the way the single hand-to-hand combat and the Romans becoming undisciplined and not staying in formation, while it may be cinematically awesome to watch, is just not really how it would have worked a lot of times.
I thought though, yes, I mean, of all the Roman, another one and which in some ways I think is a mistake. Viewing it that way from much of Hollywood, it's in reality when you see that when you first saw that scene, what were you thrilled by? You weren't thrilled by individual sort of cinematic combat with wild slashes and things like that. What was the most thrilling part of that sequence was seeing this sort of discipline and tactical skill on display. And so I wonder if Hollywood in the future they would take more and more gambles on portraying that. That was a thrilling part of the movie. In some way, I mean, watching it again, a couple of things struck me, right? Again, you have to make it suspenseful for the film. I was thinking if I was in charge of that, like, is that really, I mean, from the beginning, would you have really needed to test? The reason the testudo there now is what I think is you as the director and the screenwriter, you want to show once again the difference between technological skill and advancement over just sort of wild barbarian tactics, right? And the best way to do that is the testudo because no one else did that sort of thing, and that's why you did it. Even if you actually think about that fight, I don't know if the testudo was actually what I would have done there, right? In reality, I was thinking about this. First off, maybe they should have just deployed the entire fort, right? If they had just deployed all the soldiers they had in a line, they would have won. Or the other thing I was thinking of, and this often occasionally happened, the moment those Celts swarm the Testudo, that's when you open the fort doors, and that's when the rest of the soldiers, in some sense, should have poured out, right? And then and attacked them while they were distracted. But again, the whole point for that movie is to show that a small number of disciplined soldiers can hold their own and defeat larger undisciplined masses, right? That was and it was thrilling to watch. So again, just I love that when you see the beginning of the movie or in that beginning of that scene, the three of them, right? There are three columns, right? And they're all trotting at this pace. I wonder how many times and the armor looks good. It looks worn. It looks usable. It's a great sequence. I love seeing that sort of thing. And then when the testudo breaks so they can get to their guys, then again, yes, then they form into this circle, right? This formation. And that reminded me of, and I went looking for it, and I sent you an email of South Korean riot police training. I once tried to show students of mine what would have been like, right? Is there some way to have seen something like this happen? And I settled on South Korean riot police training. Their shields are about the same size, and it's all about holding the line in your formations against undisciplined mobs.
It's interesting that South Korea has a complicated relationship with democracy and its evolution that people actually should learn more about.
Right.
As
Especially
a
lately.
Yeah, as a casual student of it, we didn't really learn much about what happened to South Korea after the Korean War, but you learn that it was in many respects a dictatorship for a long time. And it's to Sidequest a little bit, it's a fascinating history, a lot like what happened in Taiwan, for example. The political history in both countries is fascinating. But one thing that we definitely should talk about here is we talked about Rome being civilization and uh, the the Seal people is the tribe of painted Scottish quote barbarians from the Roman perspective. We talk about how we learn though that perhaps the Romans can learn a little bit from the natives, right?
Right.
Because Channing Tatum has a friend who is a is I can't remember what tribe. I guess he was part of the Seal people, although I can't remember the exact tribe that he was a part of. I'm
Are you
spa
talking about his like the co-star of that movie, the
correct.
the slave? Right. So yes. So
Esca is his
Esca,
name.
yes. So Esca is I guess he was a noble of this tribe that we do know a little bit about that lived in northern England, called the Brigantes.
Right.
And so yes, Channing Tatum's character is called Marcus Flavius Aquila, which is Roman for eagle, right? Um, he basically convinces the crowd to spare this man's life during a sort of local gladiatorial, which basically was like an execution, right? They were going to execute this guy. And so Channing Tatum, or Marcus Flavius, saves his life, and so this guy pledges himself to
As a
him
slave.
as his slave, but
Right.
yet he pledges never to abandon him. And then so you have doubts about that in the movie when they go up north, but then of course, spoiler alert. Um, it's another aspect of the movie and part of these stories that I liked. The movie's again very simple, right? Is it
Right.
teaches it was a young adult novel that was, attempting to teach sort of a moral here.
Right. And they're going up for the audience, they're going up north because Channing Tatum's father had led the Ninth Legion when it was destroyed, disappeared. Nobody knows what happens to it.
And
So
that's a big
Channing,
disgrace.
yeah, and Channing Tatum is, yeah, it's dishonor to the family to lose an eagle and to lose the standard. And Channing Tatum, after that battle that we discussed previously, is injured. His leg is injured. He's discharged from service, and he's trying to find his purpose. And we'll get into his uncle in a minute, played by Super Sky Points here to Donald Sutherland. Uh,
Mm.
and he says, "Look, this is what I can do. I'll take Esca. He's my guy. He'll be my guide. We'll go north. We'll find this eagle, and we'll see what can happen." Uh, and while they're doing that, they have sort of a dances with wolves kind of. You learn from the quote barbarians. I don't know why I brought up Dance with Wolves. I tried to side quest here. I tried to watch that movie not long ago, and I remember
Yeah.
liking it when I was younger. Could not watch it. Could not get through it. But that's not
Did it age
what.
well? It didn't age well for you?
No, not at all.
What didn't age well?
None of
Just
it.
the sensibility of it, or
None of it. It just seemed dumb and boring from the very beginning. And I just said, why did I ever watch this movie? I don't know. I I mean, look, if you like it, you like it. It just I didn't do much for me. I just the whole time was wondering, what am I doing? But anyway, but you learn from Esca maybe some way to be a little more humane, to not be so harsh, and the two learn from each other during this trip to find the missing eagle.
it is. Tatum's character, yeah, the Channing Tatum's character grows. He tends to be again, yeah, there are little subtle things where, and this actually goes along with occasionally is that in these movies, occasionally what you have is yes, you have civilization, but you also have this sort of cold-heartedness that comes with. But then you have the more, I guess, I don't know, closer to the heart sort of, folks that are not Romans, right? And this actually reminds us of an occasional trope from even Roman historians, where they would often take, say, quote unquote, barbarian peoples and compare them favorably towards what they considered the sort of the lax, immoral decadent, Roman aristocracy, right? Even, Tacitus wrote a whole book, he wrote like a little book about the Germans that basically said that the Germans were more moral, had more strong, character than the Romans that Tacitus, encountered in Rome. And so you see a little bit of that, right? You see moments of that in the film where Esca is more honorable than sometimes Tatum's character, but then certainly some of the other Roman nobility, right? That again are supposed to sort of, for us, play the part of, head in the sand, bureaucrats and nobles and rich people. What I found interesting though was, I don't know, I found the movie very, very smart in that sense, but then they have no problem portraying these like the seal people, the Pictish king, as fairly well. They had their customs, but they were perfectly okay as well with being cruel to their enemies and savage in that way, and having a fairly us versus them moral code, right? You see this when the seal the seal chief's son, right, the main villain, I don't want to, I mean, for folks that haven't seen the movie, that he does something at the end that in his moral code was justified, but you as the viewer, of course, it does something where you want to see this guy dead. Uh,
Right. And I think though that so I struggle with that. I mean, that portrayal, I know that Kevin McDonald tried to work on that as hard as he could to get it as accurate as possible. Although obviously, like we talked about earlier, picked it means generally painted people, and it could be a reference to tattoos or war paint or whatever.
yeah.
The historical accuracy of that, I think the main thing, the way that I took that was that it was there to show that there's an otherness to these people, but it
Yeah.
also plays up because there is a lot that we don't know about a lot of those tribes. So you can have a little bit more, I don't know if fun's the right word, but you can have a little bit more artistic liberty with that, or commercial artistic liberty, since that's
Right.
what you're doing here. You're trying to make money with the film, right?
Oh, I mean,
Yeah.
when you see those warriors, to get a little PG-13, I mean, they're Pictish, the Seal people warriors they're badass, right? I mean, they
Yeah.
are they're portrayed in a realistic way, but they're again, as I said earlier, it reminded me so much of those cool, like, Huron and Mohawks from Last of the Mohicans, right? The way they have these Mohawk hairstyles, where they cover themselves in this, it wasn't blue, it was like this brown war paint. Even like the seal skin jackets that they have, uh, it's it definitely gives you an exotic otherness, right? Like this guy's in, I mean, this guy's at the edge of he's at the edge of the world in that sense, and he's all alone with his slave Esca, who he does not now he's not so sure of this guy's oath and loyalty anymore, right? And then that by the way, the actor that portrays the main villain, the seal chief's son, is in a very sort of forgotten but underrated crime movie from France called The Prophet. It's this like French Algerian actor, forget his name. I loved his performance in this movie. It was very natural. I don't know. I thought his performance was very unmannered, unactory, right? It seemed very natural. All his gestures, his facial expressions. Um, and if you see his other work, he's kind of like that. He does a lot with very little talking.
Right. And one thing, to go back to the way they were portrayed, when I first watched the movie, for some reason it reminded me of the movie Dead Man, which is, if you like independent movies, you probably like Jim Jarmusch movies. And if you
Uh,
like Westerns and you like the history behind Western theories of how the West was, I don't want to say won or civilized, but transformed into its modern state, Dead Man is a perfect movie to watch and appreciate Richard Wade's urban frontier thesis, especially if you watch it alongside The Searchers, which is not remotely what it was what Frederick Jackson's Turner's Frontier thesis, right? Those two movies kind of counter each other and present alternate views of how the West was transformed. That was my first thought when I saw it. But I also thought too that the way that the SEAL people were portrayed, I didn't necessarily view them as villainous. I viewed them more as they're living in a harsh area. It's a tough
Yeah.
place, and their rules to survival. And I thought that they were not really that different from the way that Channing Tatum's character was at the start of the movie, right? And
Uh,
so
yeah, that's a
I
good point.
because there's a scene there where Channing Tatum says you should kill this kid or this young warrior
Right.
to Esca, and Esca doesn't do that. And Channing Tatum says you should never hesitate. That becomes important later on. We won't give away exactly why it's important, but I mean, the way that I interpreted that, and especially at the end, and I am going to have to give away spoilers here for this. Channing Tatum's character kills the character who becomes the chief of the SEAL people for a very short period of time, or at least the leader of them. And he does it by drowning him in the water,
Yeah.
and all the paint comes off.
Right. Right. You're right. That's a very memorable scene.
Right. And so my thought on it was you're finally seeing this person without the paint, and it's similar to like the transformation of what Channing Tatum's character has undergone. And you're seeing that you're not really that different, right?
A great point.
And
You're
so
right.
that's the way that I took their role in that movie, was to kind of push Tatum's character to be more like Esca in many respects.
I agree with that. And actually, to further your point, all the interaction, all your interactions with a lot of these, these barbarian folks they're always acknowledging Rome as the top dog, right? And then at some point, you get so far out of the Roman sphere that these SEAL folks, right, these Picts, they don't have fear of the Romans, and they are just as dismissive and in some ways brutal towards these Romans as you see exactly as the Romans are towards the people they conquer, at least initially in their path. So there is a parallel there, right? And yeah, Tatum's character, he can expect no mercy in that regard. Although, of course, you have this little boy that ends up helping them, and the ladies too, these women that find him to be a novelty up north, right? And they make Google eyes at him because people are people. Um, Typically in movies, sometimes if you watch a lot of movies about ancient Rome, especially the ones from the 50s or 60s, Rome is always, and it goes to the Monty Python. This movie had I still thought of it though, that it had a nice measured view of Rome, right? Rome as civilization, and yet, yes, there are coldnesses there, yet Rome is not viewed as like this horrible, horrible culture empire, right? In that sense, it's just it is. Whereas you often tend to see movies of the period, right? Romans always take it, script, in the script on the chin as being like a force for evil, even though, of course, they brought much, much that we still use today, right? It's like that Monty Python skit, like, what have the Romans ever done for us,
Yeah.
And they list these things. The skit keeps going, well, except for this,
Of
and this.
course, the roads.
Yeah, except for roads, the aqueduct, good medicine, literacy, blah blah blah. What have they ever done for us? Um, but you're right. I thought it had a measured view of Rome, but it was a good parallel.
Well, I think too with Donald Sutherland, who is just great in everything that he's in. Um, he his character and some of the Roman elite in the area where Channing Tatum is going to recover after his leg injury, and he meets Esca.
Yeah.
They're kind of soft and weak and are kind of trading on the Roman name, right? They're just they haven't really done a whole lot. It doesn't seem like they're not really doing anything to win any sort of glory. What you think of when you think of Rome, like going out and winning battles and conquering
Yeah.
territory and those sorts of things. Not that you all understand I'm not making value judgments about that because we could spend a lot of time talking about how Caesar just plundered Gaul just to get rich. So I was reading its commentaries on
Although, I mean,
the Gallic War, but those guys look kind of sit around the table and talk politics, but don't really do anything action wise, right?
and that brings up if you, I mean, if you read your Roman history for a good while, the Roman aristocracy was you had to fight in 10 campaigns if you wanted to be in the Senate, right? If you were a wealthy, I mean, if you were a senator or high up in Rome, you had done your time, right? I mean, as a soldier, as a tribune, commanded soldiers. Um, I mean, whether you were tactically any good or not, you often, and by this time of the empire, I'm trying to think. I mean, had the separation was the separation far enough now that senators and folks were now part of a bureaucracy rather than ever having cut their teeth as, say, junior officers, tribunes, right, in the Roman army. Because, yes, Caesar, right, I mean, Caesar, but, Caesar and Pompey and Crassus and all those guys at that era, they had fought. They had
Right.
fought in 10 campaigns. They had, they pulled their swords out and cut meat, even though they were, by our standards, they were extremely wealthy and politically powerful people. In their youth, they had been part of the military in the sense because there was no big separation there was no professional military as we think of it back then. But by this time of Hadrian and Antoninus Pius and Marcus Aurelius, there is starting to be a fairly decent separation that would become very more pronounced couple centuries later, or even a century later, between senators and governors and things like that, and the military, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
these guys, yeah, you already see them as soft and flabby in the sense that they have no idea what it would be like, to serve in the legion, so to say.
Yeah, and I don't know as far as it seemed to me like, and again, I will watch almost anything with Donald Sutherland in it. But it just seemed like his role was there specifically so they could have Donald Sutherland in the movie and make the movie in the first place, right? Like he
Like
seemed,
Michael Caine, man,
yeah,
if you got Michael Caine there or Donald Sutherland, it's like a warm blanket, that makes you feel okay. This movie is going to be okay.
right, right. And one thing that I did want to wrap this up on is the similarity that so in movies involving, and I'll go back to my Native Americans in film class, in the concepts of savages is how a lot of times the Native Americans were portrayed, right? So you
Right.
had these different stereotypes, right? The noble savage and everything, and then the just savage, right? And I want to go back to the searchers with this because a lot of times what you see in these movies is the quote, savages are not that different from the quote, civilized people. And think about the searchers, John Wayne's character and Chief Scar in that movie. There
Right.
is a real moment of understanding between those two, in which Scar is implying to John Wayne, Ethan, saying, he's basically saying, we're not that different, you and I.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that you have to keep in mind when you watch these movies is there are a lot of similarities between groups of people that you would think would otherwise be radically different. And so that's one thing that you should consider as you watch this movie, which I think that you should. But looking at this, we've talked about kind of the historical inaccuracies in it. I wasn't really troubled by that because I didn't feel like the purpose of this movie was to portray some sort of historical time period or historical narrative
Right.
or make some point about Republican forms of government that are tied up with gladiator fights for some dumbass reason.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't
I
know,
agree
man.
with you. I
Um,
agree with you. The movie, again, it's a simple movie. It was taken from a young adult novel, right? It's as you say, there's a path, right? The hero's arc is Channing Tatum's character has a moral arc. Um, I thought the movie was grounded enough, accurate enough that I enjoyed it rather than looking for inaccuracies. Because there aren't any glaring inaccuracies in the kind that make you just cringe or laugh or just, bite your lip. Um,
Sharks and places.
yeah, no, the movie I enjoyed it immensely. It's one of my favorite, I guess, Roman era movies. It made its money. It made a little bit more than what it cost to make. It is, it is a nice small story that makes for, it doesn't, it doesn't try to do too much. And in not doing too much, I think it's a movie that will last for a while rather than, rather than other films that try to go too big too Hollywood, and are just I think are viewed later on, with a little bit of contempt or side eye at least. This one doesn't. Again, I enjoy this movie a lot. Um, Tatum does a good job. I mean, he's not a great actor, but he doesn't overact, right? He in some sense, in some ways, he actually might have been. I mean, he was just fine. He doesn't, a Roman male of that time period, I imagine, wouldn't have been super effusive in certain moments, like he isn't, right? Little things that I liked in that movie. For example, someone must have said something about how the gladius is not a slashing weapon, it's a stabbing weapon. So in the battle scene, you see Tatum's character using a gladius, I guess, in a more accurate way, where he's stabbing, his enemies with it rather than like these wild slashes and things like that. Um,
Yeah, that was good. I thought the battle scenes were really good, and I don't think you're watching this movie for anything other than, like we said, as we were describing the plot. His father is viewed to have lost the Legion, lost the Standard, and lost Rome, right? Because that's how important these Eagles were. And he's just going back to regain his family's lost honor and gain dignity in doing that. And that's really all you're watching it for. It's just a I don't want to say just a silly adventure movie, but that's essentially what it is. And I think part of the one of the good things about it is the budget was only, I shouldn't say only $25 million, but for an action movie, that's pretty cheap. I think that helped them focus a little bit more on keeping the story moving and keeping the fight scenes from getting too elaborate, too slowed down, too boring, too
exactly.
one-on-one, because they didn't have a whole lot of extra money to work with. They couldn't do reshoot after reshoot after reshoot.
Yep. It's the John Wick, the reason the first John Wick movie is so good, and my opinion superior to the others, is because they shot it on a string budget. They only had, I think, like one camera, and that's why they had to choreograph all those fight scenes, right? They had to do these in one takes instead of lots of edits and other cameras. Uh, and with this movie, what's nice is, yeah, you don't have some CGI view of Rome where they give you some prologue where, we see Marcus Flavius Aquila, Channing Tatum's character in Rome first, and you get this cheesy CGI. You don't get any of that. You get, and there was a nice, you get a fort, right? And it looks like a fort. In some ways, it reminded me of some of those, things you read about or movies you see that's based, in Afghanistan or so. It's like an outpost, right? And the soldiers there seem like they're acting like soldiers everywhere, right? They're gossiping about their new commander when he comes in, right? They're expressing doubts. You know, overflowing toilets are still overflowing toilets and stink. You still got to drill, you got to train, you got to do a lot of scut work. I enjoy those. I enjoyed that part of the movie as well. I thought that was as usual, there's a little bit of Hollywood in the sense of where they gotta have fire. You always have to have fire as a weapon in these battle scenes. Luckily, there was mercifully few. But I tried to figure out, is that accurate where they are just dunking tons of black oil, like this petroleum stuff, on their stakes, right? Luckily, they had a ditch, right? You know, you always want to have a ditch, but and then they light it on fire, and it's like, right, and the whole trench is on fire. I wonder how was that accurate at all, or I mean, does that not present any danger if you have these oil petroleum based fires that right? Won't that eventually weaken the other part of the fort? So that was the one little thing that I'm always amused by in these movies. They got to have some form of fire in there. But luckily, they didn't do weird stuff like flaming arrows, or you've seen this in a few movies. I've seen three Hollywood depictions of people lighting these big wicker balls on fire and pushing them towards Romans. Uh, Spartacus on the Kubrick movie, Spartacus did that sort of thing. It was in the Stars Spartacus show, which I
Oh
loved.
wow, that
And
one.
then in that movie
God.
Centurion, right, which is also about the massacre of the Ninth Legion. They have the scene where the Ninth is getting massacred, and the attack starts with these flaming balls coming out of the woods. This movie did not have any. I thought it was again very well done, very well restrained, except for the fire pit, the fire ditch.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think of Robin Hood Men in Tights, and they're doing the opening credits, and the villagers come out and say, "Every time there's an effing Robin Hood movie, you burn our village down," because they're shooting the arrows with fire, and uh, you, Mel Brooks movies always have memorable lines in them. But the historical stuff, I mean, there's enough unknown, I think, about Roman Scotland that you can take a few more liberties and not be too terribly worried about it, as far as getting so much wrong. But I also think that the goal of this movie was not to say we're gonna create a completely historical movie. We're trying to tell, a movie based on a novel. We'll get it as accurate as we can. And I don't think you're coming there to watch it necessarily for the accuracies or inaccuracies. You're just there to have a good time. I mean, it's a good movie to put on the background and
Uh,
just kick back
it's a
and watch it.
very Yes, it's a very archetypal movie. Father, right? It's father son. Father wants sort of to either. It's kind of like Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker archetype there. It's also a chase movie. It's a revenge movie, a chase movie. The last part of it has a little bit of that apocalypto feel, which is I love that movie, very underrated movie, Apocalypto. Um, yeah, it's also, I mean, it's got all good elements in there. It's got its fish out of water. It's got its civilization, and then the outskirts of civilization part, right? It has as you say, maybe a little bit of dances with wolves in the sense that, these more elemental folks teach, right, some moral lesson to say the more quote unquote civilized person in that sense. Um, and again, it also has the redemption arc of the soldiers, right? You have the scene at the end where these old soldiers come back to help Channing Tatum's character, right? And the survivors of the Ninth, the quote disgraced guys that ran, now they get to redeem themselves. That was a nice touch.
That reminded me, and I can't remember what that happened in, but I remember some early High Republic era group that had like lost a battle and turned and kind of fled, and they got a chance to regain their honor at the end.
This is a Kenne. Okay,
Yeah.
so yes, there was an entire, I guess, legion or cohort that had if I remember, had fled or had escaped Cannae, and the Senate wouldn't skip. One of the generals wanted to wanted to recruit them again, and the Senate said fine, but they're not allowed to. I think it was like they're not even allowed to step forth in Italy. And then they finally played a big part in the Battle of Zama, where Scipio Africanus defeated Hannibal, or some sort of sense, and like sort of regained their honor, that sort of thing.
All right. Now the one because I got my time period a little wrong there, so we'll just skip past that as quickly as possible. But one thing though that I thought was interesting at the end was, and this is giving away the ending, obviously, they get the eagle back, and they Esca and Channing Tatum give it to the Roman political authority, and then they leave, and it's sort of like Esca's freed. It's never said that, but it's implied that Esca's freed. And they kind of head off to maybe like there was a planned sequel if this had been done better at the box office. And I think I texted or emailed you about it after I watched it the first time, and I said I kind of feel like they're going to do a buddy cop detective agency thing in Rome where they're going to
Yeah.
solve crimes, and I think you called it 21 BC Jump Street. Uh,
Yes, yes, it does
some
have honestly, the last line of the movie is a little cringy for me. It almost the way Tatum's character says, "Hey," or the one says, "What do we do now?" And then he says, his line at the end. It had all of a sudden like centuries, like it's been catapulted into the present age, and all of a sudden, it just had a weird little modern vibe to me. That literally that last line. There's an alternate ending of that movie, actually, in the DVD. I haven't seen it, but apparently in the DVD, there's an alternate cut where they decide Channing Tatum's character decides not to bring the eagle back to these, back to, to the main city in England, to the Roman officials, right, to the Roman governor, and instead, I think, keeps the eagle or buries the eagle with all those Ninth Legion, legionaries that died helping him at the end, and says it should remain it should be buried with the soldiers that honored it or something like that. That would have been an interesting ending. Um, but then again, it wouldn't have given those guys, those, Roman bureaucrats, sort of a comeuppance at the end.
And that reminds me of, and I'm going to say this very slowly, so yes, I can pull it up in time. There is a movie starring Will Smith in which you really get to see his acting chops. I Am Legend.
Oh,
He's fantastic in that. There's an alternate ending to that would have been much better and made a lot more sense and changed kind of the narrative of the film and the way that it played out. I do think that alternate ending, and if you look it up on Wikipedia, Channing Tatum, Marcus would have burned the eagle where the final battle takes place, and then Marcus and Esca are approaching Hadrian's Wall, talking about what they're going to do next. Sometimes those darker, more symbolic endings are more powerful when you write them, but for whatever reason, I guess they don't test well. I don't know, but I think that would have been a pretty powerful ending. I would have liked to have seen a sequel there. I would have liked to have seen something happen with this or this universe explored. Maybe some bored producer for
well,
Netflix or one of the streaming channels who just comes across this and is listening to it, pick it up. I mean, I think that you could really do something interesting with this because
there
Rome
is
and
more.
Britain,
There's more stuff. In fact, I mean, she wrote
right?
a sequel that takes place, not the same characters, but I mean, one of the Roman emperors, actually the father of the two boys, the two Roman emperors in the Gladiator 2 movie, Caracalla and Geta,
Ugh.
campaigned with their father, Septimius Severus, in 212 or so in Caledonia, right? Or what is, the southern part of Scotland. Um, and so there might have been stories, and there was a couple. There were also later on. There was a couple of Roman emperors that were proclaimed emperors by the Britannic legions, right? And she fashioned a novel. The same lady that wrote Legion of the Ninth. there. Now they have made a couple of movies. One was sort of tied to a King Arthur sort of story about, the last, the sort of mix of Romans and British people sort of holding the line against the more barbarian Saxons, right? I think they made one with Colin or Clive Owen or something that was sort of it was King Arthur-ish, right? They sort of took the earliest legends of Arthur and turned it into sort of like a Roman movie. Um, you know, I
Right. I'm trying to find that. I remember reading about that. I can't remember who it was. It was what Romulus Augustulus leaves,
and
and
there's
then
another film that I've not seen. You're right. It's called The Last Legion, and it's like, yeah, and it's about the last Roman. They fashion a completely fantastical tale that the last of the Western Roman emperors, Romulus Augustulus, when he's deposed in Italy, he travels to Britain to to the last Roman legion that might have been loyal to him. But I never saw the film.
that might be something. Colin Firth is in this. Wow,
Colin
interesting.
Firth, and so also Ben Kingsley. So I mean, you know, it's got a decent roster of decent roster of actors there.
Interesting.
Trying to pay the bills, right? They got to pay for their grandkids' tuition at college.
It did not do well at the box office. Well, maybe we should put that one. We can do this as we rediscover movies that did not get enough appreciation in their time here. But speaking of appreciating movies, we've got to rank this thing.
All right.
So we're going to go back to our ranking system from 300. It's going to stay the same.
Remind me again.
Uh, an all around. I'm glad you asked because I was about to, to read it out. So, an all around excellent movie is Alexander the Great.
Okay.
Surprisingly good is Claudius. Good but not great is Pyrrhus. Average, not good, but also not terrible. Probus. Awful. Ephialtes, if I'm pronouncing that right.
FEL. Okay. I'm gonna give this a.
Ephialtes,
I'm
right.
gonna give this I'm gonna give this a Claudius. Uh, is it a great movie? Um, I don't know, but it's definitely above average. It's surprisingly good, surprisingly rewatchable. Um, you know what? This movie, for me, to my own little ranking, this movie would have been college hungover Sunday if it's on TBS and I just happen to go through it. The channel would have remained, and I would have sat on my couch and watched it for the whatever the 13th time. Uh, it would have passed that test.
I'm gonna go with that ranking as well. I was thinking about a Pyrrhus, but I decided to go with Claudius because when you first told me about this movie and I watched it, I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it. So I'm gonna go with Claudius. I wasn't expecting a whole lot from it, and I really enjoyed it, and I watched it again, and I enjoyed it. Tia watched some of it with me. That's Mrs. Classical Antiquity Side Quest to those who were listening. And it's a fun movie to watch. I think if you have young kids, they'll like the movie, and they'll pick things up from it. I know it's primarily a male-driven movie, but I think that young boys, young girls would enjoy this movie. I think they would identify with kind of the themes of it and would like it. So I think if you haven't seen it yet, you definitely should. You won't lose much. It's not a very long movie. You're not going to be out much time. And certainly it's a good thing to queue up over the holiday season. It's only 114 minutes, so it's not even 2 hours of your time to spend watching it. But we have thrown out a couple of movies that we could throw on this pile for the next movie review.
All right.
But I'm going to let you throw some out there and let's see if we can pick one. I'm intrigued by Centurion and also The Last Legion. I feel like maybe we need to watch The Last Legion at some point, but throw some stuff out. What are you thinking about?
Are we still with just Roman themes, or I
And
mean
anything from antiquity.
anything from antiquity? I would love. yeah, I think I wonder maybe we did Centurion and The Last Legion is like together, right? And then we can do a comparison. Um, it would be fun to do Gladiator too, you and I. It would be fun to do that, but it would be a little
I
savage. Um,
I think I have to watch. I think I have to do that one with Dr. Sereno. I uh,
Actually, there's a couple movies. This one doesn't involve any sort of military stuff, but there's a movie called Agora that takes place in Alexandria about a famous lady philosopher, right? And she was eventually murdered by a mob in the 300s. That was I like that. I thought it was a good film. Um, another,
oh, it's based on Hypatia,
yeah.
who you guys may remember if you've seen the TV show The Good Place. Lisa Kudrow's character.
Oh, okay.
That's a good choice. I would like to watch that one.
Agra is a good, yeah, it's a good film. I can't remember the actress, but you'll recognize her the moment you see her. Um, have you
Rachel
ever
Wise.
seen Ben? Have you ever seen I, Claudius?
I have seen the TV show, yes.
Okay, that would be, I wonder if that would be fun to review and talk about because when I watch that, that to me is if you ever want the precursors to The Sopranos and episodic television, it's also to me an example of how you can do something on a small budget that is so well written, so well directed. Even the camera movements are brilliant and transports you into another world. I would love to blather on about that show with you as well.
I like that. Those are all great ideas for Agora. I'm gonna have to do some digging on that one because that is not streaming in the US. So I'm definitely gonna look into that one though. I'm very interested
I'm gonna
about
see.
that.
I don't know. When my father left me a legacy of DVDs, I may have a copy, but I gotta look in all my shelves to see. I may have a copy of Agra, but I'm not sure. It's not so. It might be on Amazon, right? To purchase a rental.
I will find it. We will definitely find it, and we will do some more movie reviews. And in the interim, we have plenty of other episodes that we are either working on or are have completed and are going to post. Again, we're trying to do these about once a month. So check us out at the website bullcitycoordinators.com. We are everywhere you get your podcasts. We are on the socials, Mastodon and Blue Sky at Antiquity Pod. Uh, Other socials, you know where to find me. Go to our YouTube channel. That's where I'm hoping to get some more subscribers. Not that I'm trying to monetize this thing, but if I can just get us to 300 subscribers, I might get a couple of pennies so I can buy some more discount used secondhand books of primary sources so I can keep reading and learning more about this and do more episodes. And, I have to do more episodes because the Classical Antiquity Side Quest is a podcast without end.